Supreme audit institutions make significant contributions to their societies by bringing accountability, integrity, and transparency to government. When Supreme audit institutions lead by example, they serve as catalysts for improvement in government. Nowhere is this more important than in being transparently accountable for their performance. In Johannesburg in 2010, when we had our Intosia, we adopted the international standards of Supreme audit institutions, commonly known as ISAIs. ISAI 20 in particular calls on Supreme audit institutions to assess and report publicly on their performance. Supreme audit institutions across the world are trying to do just this, but they are looking to Intosia for guidance on how to measure, first and foremost, their performance, and secondly, how to communicate to citizens and their stakeholders. Communicating what? Communicating the Supreme audit institution's value and benefits. Once again in Johannesburg, in the Intosia Congress, we called on the working group on the value and benefits of Supreme audit institutions to develop further what we consider to be a credible measurement tool to communicate with the citizens and their stakeholders. Communicating to them with regard to the Supreme audit institution's value and benefits. I am joined today by Anna Goresen, the Deputy Director of IDI, who has been closely involved in the efforts to follow up on the decisions on the Intosia Congress to develop a measurement tool that will communicate the values and benefits of Supreme audit institutions. Aina, can you briefly outline how this work has been taken forward?
Certainly, Terence. After the Intosia Congress, we set up a task team to take the work forward. The task team was coordinated by the Intosia Development Initiative. We started by examining the existing tools, both those tools developed by the Sai community and those developed by donor agencies. We tried to assess whether any of these tools were suitable to serve our purpose and the rationale behind our Sai performance measurement framework. We needed a tool that had a scale, a performance scale that can be used. In our case, that meant measuring compliance with the ISAIs, the International Standards for Supreme Audit Institutions, the framework for the value and benefits of SAIs, as well as other Intosia guidance and best practices. We needed a tool that allowed us to measure performance and manage performance over time. And it had to be a tool that contributed to a better understanding of and better performance of SAIs. When looking at the tools that existed, we found that none of these tools really met our purposes in full. There wasn't one single tool that really allowed us to measure performance against the ISAIs and international best practice over time. So what did we do? We decided to develop our own tool, a tool that has become known as the Supreme Audit Institution Performance Measurement Framework. The tool has three overriding goals. Firstly, to effectively communicate the value and benefits of SAIs to citizens. Second, to assist SAIs measure and report on their performance against the ISAIs and international standards. And thirdly, to better enable SAIs to measure performance and monitor performance over time, both for internal and external purposes. Having these goals in mind, Terence, can you say a little bit about the key features of the Sai Pmf?
Certainly. The Sai Pmf is designed to provide a broad, high-level overview of all aspects of a Supreme Audit Institution. It examines the context in which the Supreme Audit Institution operates and its independence and legal framework. Specifically recognizing these are important, but beyond the direct control of the Supreme Audit Institution. It looks at its audit standards and core audit practices through file reviews and at visible elements of the Supreme Audit Institution's external performance, such as the submission, publication, and dissemination of its reports. It also looks at the services that support its core business, such as human resources and communication. The outputs of the Supreme Audit Institution's PMF assessment is a narrative performance report. This synthesizes the findings of the assessment to present a coherent story about the Supreme Audit Institution's performance. And it also helps to communicate to stakeholders the value and benefits of the Supreme Audit Institution. It may also show how the environment in which the Supreme Audit Institution operates, including how its independence and legal framework supports or constrains the value and benefits of Supreme Audit institutions. This narrative assessment is informed rather than driven by a set of indicator scores. These indicators are important and attract considerable attention. But as all auditors know, professional judgment is required to interpret any scores from an indicator. Now, Aina, I understand you have had an initial consultation on the Sai Pmf across the Intosia and donor communities. What are the main questions the communities are asking about this Sai Pmf instrument?
Yes, Terence, there's been tremendous interest in the Sai Pmf, both from the SAI and from the donor communities. And we're getting a lot of questions. Perhaps the most common question we're getting is from the SAI community. And they're really asking about in which ways the Sai Pmf will be appropriate and relevant to their organizations.
In fact, in this regard, we have developed the Supreme Audit Institution's PMF in a way that will be applicable for SAIs of different sizes and levels of development and from different administrative heritages. For example, whether Auditor-General models or court models or any other model that exists within our Intosia community. But we have also developed it as a measure against the ESIs. If a Supreme Audit Institution is implementing the ESIs and wants to check their performance against the ESIs, it is a relevant tool to make use of. And if a Supreme Audit Institution wants to assess the gap between its current performance and the ESIs, once again, it is highly relevant to use for this purpose.
Thanks very much, Terence. Are you saying that all SAIs will be required to apply the Sai Pmf?
Not at all. The use of the Sai Pmf is voluntary. And it, in fact, should be the decision of the head of Sai to decide whether or not to use it, how to use it, when to use it, and what to do with the results that emerge from the PMF itself.
That brings me on to another issue I wanted to discuss with you. Who should actually undertake the assessments?
It also depends on the purpose of the assessment. As Auditor-General of South Africa, the first question I would ask myself is, what is my purpose in doing such an assessment? Until I have answered that question, it is hard to decide whether a self-assessment, peer assessment, external assessment, or some combination approach is most appropriate to use this instrument.
Can you explain, Terence, how will the purpose of the Sai Pmf assessment affect the approach you take to undertake the assessment?
Yes, let me answer this by giving you an example. Let's say I want to improve the performance management systems within my office. So my senior management team has a better handle on our operations, and to also strengthen our performance reporting to Parliament and the public. I want to change the way my staff approaches performance management. I want them to own and drive forward the process. I want them to work out how to get data to measure the relevant performance indicators in a way that is consistent over a period of time. A peer or external assessment is not going to build the ownership of our performance management system. So I would opt, in this case, for a self-assessment.
That's very clarifying. What, under a different scenario, you were heading an SEI that was a major recipient of capacity development support, or indeed were looking to get support from either another SEI or from the donor community. What approach would you use in this case?
In this situation, I would need to identify my current performance baselines, or else I would not be able to measure performance improvements going forward into the future. And I know that whoever is providing me with support is spending their taxpayers' money to do so, and is accountable for the results of that spending. In this instance, the external credibility of the assessment and the openness of the assessment process may be key. So, in this regard, I need to design an approach that ensures credibility of the assessment, as well as the results that will emerge out of that assessment in the eyes of the third parties. In this case, I might opt for a peer assessment by another Intosia member, or an external assessment by a credible professional body.
Intosia, the Intosia regions, and the global Sai community have a very strong tradition of peer learning and mutual support. Can you say a few words, Terence, about how and if the Sai Pmf can contribute to peer learning amongst SEIs that face similar challenges and opportunities?
My purpose may be to benchmark my processes and performance against similar Supreme Audit institutions, that within the same region or beyond, to find ways to improve and to decide what sort of regional or global capacity development programs I can participate in. This requires more of a coordinated effort amongst a group of Supreme Audit institutions. I might also, in this instance, look to AfroSai-E or to an Intosia working group to convene a number of interested Supreme Audit institutions that may participate, to give ownership amongst my staff to the process. I might want to do a self-assessment, but to make the results comparable across the group of Supreme Audit institutions, I might want AfroSai-E or any other region or any other working group to have a quality assurance role to ensure that the tool was applied consistently across each and every country.
And there are no doubt other purposes and approaches that could be used. You mentioned in your last example peer learning. Does the Sai Pmf allow an SEI to compare its scores to other SEIs in terms of as a way of improving performance?
Simple comparison of scores between Supreme Audit institutions may not always be a meaningful exercise, but the Sai Pmf could contribute to a process benchmarking, provided this is done intelligently. There is no aggregate score on the Sai when you use this tool. Sais are scored on over 20 indicators across 7 domains. There is no system for weighing the importance of one indicator on, say, external communications against another indicator on, say, reporting on performance audits. The relative importance will vary from supreme audit institution to supreme audit institution and from year to year. So an aggregate score would not be a meaningful way of looking at these results. But at a detailed level, comparing scores on an individual indicator or dimension, say on publication of a Sai's annual report, could be useful.
I understand. So we're not going to end up then with a Sai performance league table?
No, by no means no. A performance league table based on aggregated Sai PMF score would not make any sense whatsoever in this instance.
Okay, so after the assessment has been completed, what happens to the assessment? Are the SEIs, or indeed Intosai, obliged to publish the reports?
Intosai will not publish the assessment reports. That's certainly not the intention of Intosai. Unless, obviously, this is requested by the Supreme Audit Institution itself. Publication is entirely the decision of the heads of the Supreme Audit Institutions and goes back to the purpose of the assessment. Sometimes publication may be integral to achieving the purpose of the assessment itself. Other times, the ownership of the assessment process and the results of the assessment are more important. Assessing and reporting publicly on the Supreme Audit Institution performance is a fundamental principle of the ESIs. And in this respect, in fact, it's a way that the SAI can demonstrate that it is, in fact, leading by example to improve public governance.
So will the Sai PMF in any way replace the SEI's own performance management systems or its annual performance report?
Certainly not. The Sai PMF assessment can only contribute to measuring and reporting on the Sai performance. It provides some naturally useful indicators that the Sai could incorporate into its own performance management and its own system of reporting, which basically makes this whole system a complementary tool and instrument to the Sai's own internal systems of reporting and management. But the Sai PMF measures aspects of the Sai internal processes which may be of less interest to the Sai external stakeholders as well as the citizens. In addition, the Sai should report publicly on its performance every year. But many of the aspects measured by the Sai PMF are only likely to change over a long time horizon. So a full Sai PMF should probably only be carried out every few years, perhaps every 3 to 5 years. For these reasons, the Sai PMF will never replace the Sai's performance management system and the annual performance report that is required in terms of good practice and good governance. But I hope that it can help the Supreme Audit institutions lead by example in measuring and reporting on performance and bringing accountability, integrity, and transparency to the way in which they govern their own affairs and the way in which they oversee the operations of governments. To this end, I endorse the Sai PMF and encourage you as the users of the Sai, you as heads of Supreme Audit institutions, you as management, staff, and any other stakeholder and interested party that can benefit from this instrument to make full use of it. We also encourage you to support us in its future development because it can only be beneficial to the growth of Supreme Audit institutions. It can only be beneficial to the value and benefits of supreme audit institutions. And in this regard, I look forward to this instrument coming into fruition, this instrument coming into the pipeline, and doing what it is meant to do, which is to improve the lives of citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terence.